Please respond if I'm audible. Okay, thank you so much. So welcome to the analysis of the budget and economic survey. This is the second class on budget and economic survey. In the first class, which I had conducted on 30th of August, I had covered one pillar related to budget and economic survey, that was about the public finance. In that particular pillar of public finance, I had discussed topics such as capital budget, revenue budget, deficits, debt, and I had also taken up a mains topic for discussion, that is the mobilization of tax. What are the problems and challenges with respect to mobilization of tax, and what should be done to increase the tax mobilization. In today's class, I shall be focusing on the second pillar. In the second pillar, in today's class, I shall be covering chapter 1 of the economic survey, which is state of economy, chapter 5, that is growth strategy for new India, and chapter 7, that is social sector. Initially, I had thought that all of these 4 chapters can be covered in a single video. But the problem is the chapter of social sector, which basically deals with the theme of inclusive growth, that chapter is actually lengthy. So in today's class, I shall be focusing on chapter 1, chapter 5 and chapter 7. As far as chapter 8 is concerned, I shall be covering this particular chapter in the next video. So today's class is entirely about chapter 1, chapter 5 and chapter 7 from the economic survey. And like I have already told you, wherever relevant, I shall be integrating the budget announcements into these economic survey chapters. So economic survey plus budget I have integrated, and that is how we shall be covering this particular chapters. So let's look at the first chapter, that is the state of economy. Okay, you can see this, the state of economy. Let me give you a basic details about what is this particular chapter all about. Just this particular chapter gives a bird's eye view of the entire Indian economy in terms of trends in nominal GDP and real GDP, trends in terms of GDP growth rates, trends in terms of drivers of Indian economy, trends in terms of contribution of different sectors to the Indian economy. All of these trends I have already covered in the second video of the interim budget. You must understand that this year is a special year. So there are 2 budgets. So there are a lot of things which are going to remain same in the union budget, and these things I have already covered in the interim budget. Those of you who have not watched the second video of interim budget, please go through the second video of interim budget to understand all these important trends. Apart from that, I have covered a lot of prelims related topics in this particular video as well. So I have taken a lot of prelims based MCQs, and all those MCQs I have covered in this particular video. So in case if you have not gone through, please go through that. My focus is mainly on chapter 5. When you see chapter 5, let me tell you what exactly is this particular chapter. You know that Prime Minister Modi has come up with a vision of Viksit Bharat by end of 2047. It is being said to realize the vision of Viksit Bharat, there are a number of problems and challenges which Indian economy would have to encounter and solve them. Accordingly, this particular chapter, which is titled as Medium Term Outlook, a growth vision for new India, this chapter highlights what problems Indian economy is facing and what strategies we must adopt to solve these problems. So this chapter is extremely important from the perspective of the mains examination. And let me tell you, this chapter is not just important for the students who are writing mains this year. This chapter also becomes important for the students who are writing the mains next year as well, because a lot of things remain same. So even if you are preparing for next year mains, please do focus on these chapters, because if you have read these chapters, it is as good as saying that you would be prepared for next year mains examination as well, right? So in this particular chapter, you can see these are the topics that I'm going to cover: consumption-led model, investment-led model, and the growth strategy for Amrit Kal. These topics shall be covered. So let's start our discussion here. This is the fact sheet related to GDP and growth. This particular fact sheet I have prepared by going through budget as well as economic survey. What you can do, whatever facts I have used in this particular fact sheet, you can incorporate in order to add value to your answers. Anyways, when I'm discussing the topics, I shall be using these particular facts and figures multiple times as we progress with our discussion. Let's first start with the basic thing. Because I have already discussed the trends in nominal GDP, real GDP, and trends in GDP growth rates, and so on, there's no use discussing those trends once again. So what I have done, instead of discussing those trends once again, I have incorporated some prelims based questions related to GDP calculation, which basically test whether the students know the nuances of GDP calculation or not. So let me show you the first question. Read this first question. The first question is, how many among the following goods are included in the GDP calculation of India? When you read this particular question, right, to answer this question, you need to have an understanding about what is GDP. That's the first thing. And second, what kind of goods are included or excluded from the GDP calculation. I hope everyone knows the definition of GDP. GDP refers to the market value of all final goods and services produced within the economic territory of India. The word is economic territory of India, right? And you should know which goods are included and which goods are excluded. So let's solve this particular question. First one says goods produced for barter exchange. Okay, let me just explain this. Generally, there are two types of goods: marketable goods and non-marketable goods. Marketable goods basically means those goods which are produced to be sold in the market, and they are generally sold at market determined rates. That is marketable goods. Non-marketable goods means these goods are not produced to be sold in the market. These goods are generally produced either for self-consumption or for barter exchange. What you must understand is, when we want to measure GDP, we take into account both marketable goods as well as non-marketable goods. For example, let's say I'm a farmer. I'm producing 100 kg of rice. Out of that 100 kg of rice, I might sell 80 kg of rice in the market. So that's 80 kg becomes marketable. Remaining 20 kg of rice, I might keep it for myself for self-consumption. that becomes non-marketable rice. So both marketable goods and non-marketable goods are taken into consideration for GDP calculation. So this is correct. Second-hand goods. Second-hand goods are not taken into GDP calculation simply because if you take into account second-hand goods, it will lead to double counting. So when the goods were initially produced in that particular year, the value of that goods was added to the GDP of that particular year. Once you sell this good for the second time, it becomes a second-hand good. And if you end up adding the value of that good to the GDP in the year in which it is resold, don't you think it will lead to double counting, right? So that way, the value of second-hand goods is not taken into consideration. Unsold goods in a particular year. When you see GDP, GDP is calculated as private final consumption expenditure. That is whatever money people spend on purchase of goods and services, plus gross capital formation, plus government final consumption expenditure, plus net exports. So when certain goods remain unsold in a particular year, these unsold goods are actually accounted as GCF, gross capital formation. They are accounted as changes in inventories. So let's say there is a car manufacturing company. This car manufacturing company in a year produces 100 cars. Out of 100 cars, 80 cars get sold. Can I say someone is buying those cars, 80 cars, right? So those 80 cars which are actually bought by the people, they will be accounted under the PFC. The remaining 20 cars which remain unsold, they get accounted as GCF. So goods sold in unsold goods in a particular year is actually part of GDP. Goods produced for exports, yes, it is part of GDP. Goods produced by foreign companies. Look at the definition of GDP. It says goods produced within the economic territory of India. What is economic territory? The entire physical territory of India plus the territorial water, the air space, the ships and aircrafts owned by Indian residents, SEZs, and so on. So when we measure GDP, we are not bothered with respect to who is producing goods and services. We are actually concerned with where the goods and services are produced. If goods and services are produced within economic territory, even though they might be produced by foreign companies, they will be included in the GDP calculation. So that way, if you see, the right answer would be only 4. I hope it is clear, right? Let's look at the next practice question. How many among the following services are included in the GDP calculation? This question is about goods. This question is about services. Look at the first one. Household services provided by domestic workers. Okay, please concentrate. We discuss about goods, right? Marketable goods and non-marketable goods. And we discussed that both marketable goods and non-marketable goods are included in the GDP calculation. Same way, when you talk about services, services can be marketable service and non-marketable service. Marketable service means you provide for service for which you get paid. Non-marketable service means you provide service but you don't get paid for it. Example of a non-marketable service is the services provided by homemakers. When it comes to goods, right, both marketable goods and non-marketable goods are taken for GDP calculation. But when it comes to services, please understand, only the marketable services are taken for GDP calculation. Non-marketable services are not taken into consideration. So, household services provided by domestic workers, can I say that it is a marketable service? Because it is a marketable service, it gets included in the GDP. Household services provided by homemakers. This is non-marketable service. Because it is non-marketable, it is not included for the GDP calculation. Rent paid by tenants, it's a marketable service, right? It gets included. Services provided on sale of second-hand goods. Okay. Sale of second-hand goods here, this is not included in GDP. The reason is simple, that it will lead to double counting. But if someone is providing services on sale of second-hand goods, example, let's say someone is charging brokerage commission on sale of second-hand car. The value of second-hand car, which is a good, that will not be included in GDP. But services which is offered on sale of second-hand good, can I say it is a new service, right? Since it is a new service, it gets included into the GDP calculation. So this gets included. So that way, the right answer is only 3. Let's look at the next question. You can see this question. Which among the following economic activities are included in the calculation of GDP, gross domestic product? Indian company based in SEZ and exporting goods to USA. I told you GDP means we take into account all the goods and services produced within the economic territory. SEZ is also considered to be part of our economic territory. So it should be included in the GDP. Indian Airlines company offering international flights. When we say economic territory also includes the aircrafts and ships operated by Indian residents. Air India is an Indian resident company. This Air India is operating international flight. So what is interesting is the flight here, the aircraft itself is our economic territory. Wherever the aircraft goes, that is our economic territory. So in a way, the Indian Airlines company offering international flights is part of our GDP. The income of Indian software professional based in US. Indian software professional is earning income not in India, he is earning in US. That is not India's economic territory, right? That is US economic territory. So this is incorrect. India's activities in Arctic Research Station. India's research station in Arctic is considered to be part of India's economic territory. That is why even this is correct. The right answer is only B. Coming to the last question now. Look at this. How many among the following are included in the GDP calculation of India? Okay. Please pay attention. In economy, we have what is called as payments. Payments can be categorized into two types: factor payments and transfer payments. What is factor payment? Factor payment means you provide for factors of production. What are factors of production? Land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. Someone is providing for factors of production. On providing factors of production, you get payment. Those payment that you get on providing factors of production, we call them as factor payment, which basically includes wages, interest, profit, and rent. I repeat, wages, interest, profit, and rent. Now, can I say that if you are providing for factors of production, you are actually contributing to the economy, right? Because you are contributing to the economy, the factor payments are included in the GDP calculation. What is transfer payment? Transfer payment is a payment that you get without providing for factors of production. This is something like you get free money, which generally includes, let's say, subsidies, old age pension, or unemployment allowance. All of this, you can consider them as transfer payment. Now, can I say, in case if you are getting transfer payment, you are not actually contributing to the growth of the economy. In case if you're not contributing to the growth, obviously transfer payments will not be included in the GDP calculation. So coming back here, foreign remittances into India. You must understand, foreign remittances into India is not considered part of GDP because number one, it is a transfer payment. Let's say I am a person staying in India, and let's say my brother is working in US. From US, is sending me money. That is a remittance, right? Am I contributing to the growth of Indian economy? Absolutely not. I'm just getting a transfer payment. So that is why it will not be included in GDP. That's the first reason. Second, you must understand, if someone is earning money outside India, obviously it is not part of economic territory of India. So foreign remittances is not included in the GDP. That's the first thing. Pensions for government officials. What about pensions? Okay. You must understand, pensions for government officials is included in GDP because pensions for government officials is considered to be a deferred payment. What is this deferred payment? Let me just give you an example. Let's say I am a government official. I'm supposed to get a monthly income of rupees 25,000. So ideally, government should transfer 25,000 every month to my bank account. But you know what government does? Government will deduct some amount of money and transfer that money to my pension account. Let's say out of 25,000, 5,000 government will transfer to my pension account and give me only 20,000. This 5,000 with the government deducts every month. This 5,000 at the end of my retirement, government gives me as a retirement corpus. So what I am supposed to get as part of my salary, I am getting it at the end of my retirement. So in a way, can I say pensions for government official is actually a factor payment? Getting this point? It's a factor payment. That is why, because it's a factor payment, it gets included in GDP. Old age pension and unemployment allowance. Like I said, old age pension is a transfer payment. So look at two types of pension. If you provide old age pension to the old people, which people are getting free of cost, that is transfer payment. If you provide pension to government officials, that is deferred payment, and that is factor payment. Investment in shares and bonds. It is not included in the GDP calculation. So the right answer, how many are included in the GDP calculation? The right answer in this particular case is only one. I hope everyone is clear now, right? Okay. Having discussed the basics about GDP calculation, let's move to the next part. The next topic is consumption led economy. Okay, let me tell you why is this particular topic important. Remember I told you how GDP is calculated. GDP is calculated by taking into account private final consumption expenditure, gross capital formation, plus government final consumption expenditure, plus net exports. This is how the GDP is calculated. Out of which, the share of private final consumption expenditure is 60%. GCF is around 32%. Government final consumption expenditure is around 10%. Please add all these numbers. 60 plus 32, that is 92. 92 plus 10 is 102. ये तो 100% से ज़्यादा हो रहा है. Why? Because if you look at our net exports which is actually calculated as exports minus imports. This net exports for India is -2. The reason is simple. India is majorly a import-led economy. Our imports are more than our exports. So coming back to private final consumption expenditure, which basically tells us the money spent by the households. This is a major driver of the Indian economy. And you must understand demand is actually important. The reason being, if there is no demand in the economy will not grow at all. A case in point, think of COVID. In COVID, because the country was in lockdown, right? The demand crashed. Because the demand crashed, what happened to GDP? Our GDP also declined. In fact, GDP growth rate was negative. Lockdown was lifted. When the lockdown was lifted, demand increased. In fact, we call it as pent up demand. Because of that pent up demand, GDP had a very strong and sharp rebound. That is why we call it as V-shaped recovery. This V-shaped recovery, can I say, was possible because of the demand only. So demand is indeed important. But the problem as far as Indian economy is concerned is the private final consumption expenditure is too high. And this is considered to be unsustainable in the long run. Why is it unsustainable? This is quite important, about which we shall be covering. So as far as consumption-led model is concerned, as far as the mains examination is concerned, the question that you can get in the mains is something like this. Establish relationship between savings, consumption and investment in an economy. Discuss the problems and challenges with consumption-led economy. This is the question that you can get in the mains. As far as the prelims examination is concerned, in prelims, you may get a question about what is included or excluded in the private final consumption expenditure. Something like this. Look at question number 5. Or you might get a question on the trends in the private final consumption expenditure. So what we will do here, we'll cover the prelims related part. Prelims related part as like what is private final consumption expenditure, what does it include, what does it exclude, what is the trend in private final consumption expenditure. After covering the prelims part, we will take up the mains part. Okay, please have a look at private final consumption expenditure, which basically tells us what is included and what is excluded. Look, I told you both marketable goods and non-marketable goods, they are included in the GDP calculation. When it comes to services, only the paid services or marketable services are included. Unpaid services or non-marketable services are not included. When money is spent on buying land or buildings, in India, we don't consider this as expenditure. We consider this as investment. That is why it is excluded. The money spent on land or house, this is included in GCF, gross capital formation. Rent paid by tenants is included. Shares and bonds. If you invest your money in shares and bonds, that is not included in GDP. If you invest or if you buy gold and precious metals, that is also not included in private final consumption expenditure. Rather, it is included in GCF, gross capital formation. So you must be thinking, what is included in GCF? What is excluded in GCF? That's our next topic. Not worry about it. Just know the PFCE. So coming back to the question number 5. Which among the following expenditures are excluded from PFCE? Please respond in the chat box quickly, all of you. What do you think is the answer? Yes, excluded. Okay. Money spent on purchase and land and buildings, it is excluded. Money spent on purchase of gold and precious metals, this is excluded. I'm asking what is excluded, not what is included, right? These two things are excluded. Payment of home rent is included. So right answer in this case is 1 and 3. Okay. Look at practice MCQ number 6. Private final consumption expenditure is a major driver of Indian economy, accounting for 60% of GDP. This is correct. But look at the second statement. The percentage contribution of PFC to the Indian economy has declined in the last 4 to 5 years. Has it declined or has it remained stagnant? Let's look at what economic survey says. Can you see in last 5 years, 3 to 4 years, what has happened to PFCE? It has remained stagnant, right? So that is why this statement is incorrect. So the right answer is 1 only. So having discussed the basics about private final consumption expenditure, that is what is included, what is excluded from PFCE. Now we'll get into the mains discussion, where we'll try to establish relationship between savings, investment and consumption, and then we'll discuss what are the problems and challenges if India relies too much on the consumption-led model. I'll come to this later. Okay, let's focus here. So, like I said, private final consumption expenditure is a major driver of Indian economy. And I have already told you the importance of demand, right? We need to have adequate demand in the economy, because without demand, without expenditure, economy cannot grow, right? So think, if there's a demand in the economy, it will encourage companies to make investment. It will encourage companies to increase the production, create more jobs. So because of demand itself, jobs will be created, investment will take place, GDP would increase, right? It is quite important. But there are some problems also. What is that problem? Let's understand. Okay, let's look at this relationship between consumption, savings, investment, and GDP. Okay, let's start with this consumption expenditure. Here, let's say people are actually spending less for purchase of goods and services. When people spend less money for purchase of goods and services, two things happen. One, savings of the people would increase, and second, demand in the economy would be less. Now think of any manufacturer, any person who would want to manufacture goods and services. For any manufacturer, two things are must. Number one, manufacturer needs to have adequate access to savings. He can get the savings and then he can make investment. So he has to have access to savings, first thing. Second, to make investment, there should be adequate demand also in the economy. So two things are really important for any producer. One, access to savings, and second, adequate demand. The problem in this particular case here is producer has access to savings to make investment. But the question is, for whom will he make investment? Because the demand in the economy is less. So because the demand is less, what will happen is it will discourage investment. If investment does not take place, there will be fall in the GDP. Fall in the GDP means income level of the people will reduce. And you must understand, think of a scenario where GDP is falling, income is also falling. You know what will happen? People will become very pessimistic about the future. People will think that probably their jobs are not safe. People will think probably their income might not increase in future. Because of that pessimistic outlook towards the future, you know what people will do? People will spend less money on goods and services. Can you see? This becomes a kind of vicious cycle, right? One of the examples of a country which has fallen into such a vicious cycle is Japan. I hope you must be knowing Japan's economy has stagnated because in Japan there's no adequate demand for goods and services, right? Coming to the next part, the other way, that is, what would happen if the consumption expenditure in the economy is very high in this particular case. Okay, if the consumption expenditure is very high, think what will happen? People are spending more money on goods and services. If people are spending more money on goods and services, two things are happening. There is more demand in the economy, but what has happened to savings? Savings in the economy gets reduced. And like I said, for a producer, for a manufacturer, two things are must to make a decision to make investment. One, he must have access to savings, and second, there should be adequate demand. In the first situation, he had access to savings, but there was no demand. In this situation, the tables have got turned where there is more demand in the economy, but the producer does not have access to savings, that is loans. In that particular case, what will happen? Demand is high, but look at the supply. You don't make investment. Supply will not increase. If supply does not increases and demand continues to remain high, it creates the problem of demand supply mismatch. And the demand supply mismatch will in turn leads to inflation. And we all know that if an economy has a very high rate of inflation, it falls into a particular phase which is called as stagflation. That is stagnation plus inflation. So what you've understood is low consumption expenditure and high consumption expenditure both are equally bad. What is good then? It is being said the good thing is the consumption expenditure should be moderate, neither too high nor too low. So if the consumption expenditure is moderate, two things are happening here. We have adequate savings and there is adequate demand. If I am a producer, now there is incentive for me to make investment. The reason being there is demand in the economy, and at the same time, since people are saving their money in the banks, I can get loans easily. So adequate savings accompanied by moderate demand will encourage more investment. More investment means GDP would increase. GDP increases means income level will increase. So think of this situation where GDP is increasing, income is increasing, people will become more optimistic. People will think that their job is safe, their income will safe. So because of that kind of optimism, people will continue to spend. So the moderate expenditure will continue. So this, like I said, this was a vicious cycle, and this becomes a kind of virtuous economic cycle. So to depict this relationship between savings, consumption and investment, you can see this particular cartoon. Can you see here? This is savings, right? If more amount of savings goes towards consumption, what will get affected? Our investment, right? So ideally, what should happen is more amount of savings should be used for the purpose of investment, because investment is something that will help us enhance the productive capacity of the Indian economy, right? So that is what we would want. So now let's look at the problems in the consumption led model. Okay, problems with the consumption led model. Let's look at them one by one. Let's look at the first point. The first point, like I said, according to a number of economists, consumption led model is unsustainable in the long run. Why is it unsustainable? Let me briefly explain this. In a country, you come across people of different age groups, right? 0 to 14, 15 to 59, and greater than 59. Between these three age groups, can I say the maximum demand for goods and services would come from the people who are in the working age group of 15 to 59. Right now, most of you must be knowing India is facing demographic dividend. Because we are facing demographic dividend, major chunk of India's population is in working age group. Because people are in working age group, demand for goods and services is higher. Because the demand is higher, private final consumption is higher, and GDP growth rate in India is higher. Absolutely not a problem. But the problem in this particular case here is this particular demographic dividend is not going to last forever. According to National Family Health Survey 5, the latest report, the fertility rate in India has already dropped to 2, which is below the replacement level fertility, which means less number of children are going to be born in India. And what is going to happen? People in this particular age group will move to the next age group. It being said that the demographic dividend which we are having right now, it might last until 2041, which means this model, right, where we have larger chunk of working age population, increase in demand, increase in GDP, this model is feasible until 2041. That's why I'm saying right now there's no problem, but the problem is what after 2041. Can we rely on this particular model after 2041? Absolutely not, because there will be no demand in the economy by that particular time. So what we need to do is we need to have an alternative model, and that alternative model is investment led model. What are the other problems? Let's discuss this. As we have discussed, if people spend more, what will happen to savings? Savings will reduce. And the same thing has happened in India, where the savings rate, which was like 34% in the year 2010-11, it has now dropped to 30% because of higher consumption expenditure. Apart from that, recently RBI has published a report on net financial savings of the household. RBI has highlighted that the net financial savings of the household has reduced to 47-year low of just 5%. Can I say that the savings in India is reducing because people are spending more, right? And we know if people are saving less and spending more, what will happen to investment? Investment in the economy will also reduce, right? So you can see decline in investment from 34% to 30%. Apart from that, look, inflation. We have already covered this. It is leading to problem of inflation. Next problem, decline in net exports. How net exports? Net exports is calculated as exports minus imports, right? Now think of it. People in India are purchasing more goods, more services. If they are purchasing more goods, more services in India itself, what will happen to exports? Exports to kam ho jayega. Plus, if demand is too high, some of this particular demand can be met by import from other countries. So what will happen to imports? Import will increase. So exports minus imports, which is our net exports, will become negative because decline in exports and increase in imports. Next is higher volatility in the tax collections of the government. GST, you must understand, is a consumption based tax, which means the GST collection will in turn depend upon how much money people are spending. If you spend too much, GST collection will increase. If you spend very less, GST collection will decrease. So think during COVID, when people were not buying goods and services, GST collection reduced. After COVID, when the lockdown was lifted, people started purchasing more goods and services. What happened to GST collections? Increased. So there will be large scale volatility in terms of tax collections of the government. Look at this. Now this is very interesting. Underdeveloped manufacturing. There are some economists who say that one of the reasons why manufacturing sector in India has not got developed is because of higher consumption expenditure. How is consumption expenditure and manufacturing sector linked to each other? Let's see this. Let's talk about demand. You know, each one of us, you, me, everyone, we would demand for both goods as well as services. We might purchase goods such as mobile phone, laptops, TV, refrigerator, and so on. We also avail various services, services such as education, healthcare, transportation, hotel and tourism, entertainment, and so on. It is being said that if you compare the demand for goods with demand for services, generally demand for services is more than the demand for goods. Just think about you only. The proportion of money that you spend on services is generally higher than the proportion that you spend on purchase of goods, right? That's the first thing. Second, can I say services are availed more frequently as compared to goods? Goods you might purchase like mobile phones, laptops once in 5 years, but services such as education, healthcare, transportation, tourism, hotels and restaurants, this is consumed on a much regular basis. So the demand for services is more than the demand for goods. Obviously economy has to cater to the demand, and because economy is catering to demand, you know what has happened? The service sector in India has grown at a much faster pace as compared to our manufacturing sector. So underdeveloped manufacturing sector is once again attributed to consumption led model. I hope this part is clear. Next is imbalanced industrialization. What is this imbalanced industrialization? Let me just give you an example. There are two types of goods. One is capital goods, and the other one is consumer goods. What is capital goods? Capital goods are basically those goods which are used to manufacture other goods. Example being machineries, telecommunication equipment, and so on. Consumer goods is what we generally buy, like mobile phone, laptop, refrigerator, and so on. Now, in case of India, because our consumption expenditure is high, we focus on purchase of more consumer goods. Demand for consumer goods is high. Once again, economy has to cater to demand. So economy, that is in particular manufacturing sector, has focused more on producing consumer goods rather than capital goods. That is why, 60% of our capital goods are actually imported into India. 60%. Which clearly shows that consumption-led economy has led to imbalance in our industrialization. And the last and the most important point, if households do not have good income to undertake expenditure, what will households do? Households will borrow money and then spend money. So higher consumption expenditure, particularly when the income of the household is less, this might lead to increase in the debt of the households. And no wonder RBI has pointed out that the household debt in India has increased to all-time high of 40% in the year 22-23. So you can very well see that there are number of problems and challenges with consumption-led economy. This is not a model that India can rely upon to become Viksit Bharat by 2047, right? That is why you might expect a question in mains about problems and challenges with the consumption-led economy. So what is the way forward then? As a way forward, I think we need to learn something from East Asian economies, or for that matter, China. These countries, that is East Asian economies and China, what they have done, they have focused a lot on investment-led model rather than consumption-led model. So we need to shift from consumption-led economy to investment-led economy in order to become Viksit Bharat by 2047. That is a way forward. So you can see here the way forward is, you can just read, as evident in the growth model of China and East Asian economies, we need to shift from consumption-led model to investment-led model to become Viksit Bharat by 2047. How will that help investment-led model? That is our next discussion. You need not worry about it. I hope everyone is clear with this topic of consumption-led model, right? Okay. Now what we are going to do is we are going to move to the next topic. Next topic is about investment-led economy. Okay. Just like how I covered the topic of PFC, I shall cover the investment-led economy, where we'll discuss the prelims related aspect of investment, and then we'll take up the mains topic for discussion. But why is this topic important? Can you see here? This year, when interim budget was presented, at that particular time, the Office of Chief Economic Advisor published a report. The title of the report is Indian Economy a Review. And can you see in that particular report, a separate topic was added, which is enabling investment-led economic growth. First thing, why it is important. Second, recently in the Hindu newspaper, it has been highlighted that the private sector investment in India have significantly dropped. So you might get a question on why the private sector investment has actually got reduced. So what kind of prelims questions you may expect? You can see this is the prelims related questions that you may expect. Which among the following are included in the gross fixed capital formation in the Indian economy? And which among the following best describes the concept of investment rate? So let's see here the prelims part. Okay. Remember I told you how do you calculate GDP? Private final consumption expenditure plus gross capital formation plus government final consumption expenditure plus net exports. What is that GCF? Gross capital formation. This is what we are going to cover. Gross capital formation is equal to gross fixed capital formation, GFCF, plus changes in inventories plus valuables. So let's focus here. Gross fixed capital formation. As the name suggests, gross fixed capital formation, it means investment that you make in fixed assets. What investment in fixed assets? Number one, creation of assets like roads, railways, ports, airports. Investment in machinery and equipment. Investment in research and development. And look at the last and interesting, cultivated biological resources, which means the investment in plantation crops. If you make investment in plantation crops such as tea, coffee, rubber, even that is considered to be part of gross fixed capital formation. What is changes in inventories? Remember I told you that if certain goods remain unsold in a particular year, they get accounted as gross capital formation, unsold goods. So all those unsold goods, they get accounted here, changes in inventories. Similarly, I told you if households purchase gold and valuables like precious stones, that expenditure by the households is not considered to be part of private final consumption expenditure. That expenditure is considered to be part of changes in valuables as part of GCF. So please do not get confused between gross capital formation and gross fixed capital formation. Gross fixed capital formation is part of gross capital formation. That's the first thing. Second, in India, when we say investment rate, what is that investment rate? First thing, whenever we say investment rate, we don't refer to gross capital formation. First thing. Second thing, when we say investment, we refer to gross fixed capital formation. We are talking about investment rate, which is generally expressed as percentage of GDP, right? So when we say investment rate, this gross fixed capital formation, I can express this as percentage of real GDP or percentage of nominal GDP. Please understand, when we say investment rate, it is not gross fixed capital formation as percentage of real GDP. It is gross fixed capital formation as percentage of what GDP? Nominal GDP. So three things. Investment rate is not gross capital formation. Investment rate is gross fixed capital formation. Second, investment rate is expressed as percentage of GDP. Third, it is expressed as percentage of not real GDP but nominal GDP. This is what you need to know. So coming back to the question, please read the question number 7 and tell me what is the answer. Please respond in the chat box. What do you think is the answer? Which among the following are included in the gross fixed capital formation? Yes, good, Omkar. So please read the question carefully. The question is not about what is included in the gross capital formation. The question is what is included in the gross fixed capital formation. So investment in machinery and expenditure on research and development, that is included in gross fixed capital formation. Changes in inventories and changes in valuables, it is not included. Read this question, practice MCQ number 8. Let me know the answer. Which among the following best describes the investment rate in the Indian economy? What is the investment rate? Like I said, investment rate is, yes, good Sakshi. It is the ratio of gross fixed capital formation to the nominal GDP of a country. Okay, let's come to the mains discussion. Here, already a question has been asked in the previous year mains, to be more specific in mains 2020. The question was, explain the meaning of investment in terms of capital formation. Remember, I just explained to you that what is investment in terms of capital formation, right? Second, discuss the factors to be considered while designing a concession agreement between public entity and private entity. The second part of the question is more related to PPP, public-private partnership, details of which I shall be covering under the pillar of infrastructure. Now look at the question which I have prepared. The question reads, India needs to pursue investment-led model to become $7 trillion economy, argue. Discuss the challenges before India in pursuing investment-led model. Can you see the question has actually two parts? One, you need to write as to why should India pursue investment-led economy, and then you need to highlight what challenges India would face in pursuing investment-led economy. The question has two parts, right? So let's discuss everything related to investment in next 10 to 15 minutes from the perspective of mains. Okay, please have a look at the mind map where we shall be covering the meaning, present status and trends. Why should India shift to investment-led model? Reasons as to why private sector investment has fallen and what initiatives has the government taken. Let's start with this meaning and present status. Already I told you the meaning. Investment is calculated as the ratio of gross fixed capital formation to the nominal GDP. What is a trend in terms of investment? Let's see this particular trend. If you see the overall trend, the investment rate in India has actually declined from 34% in the year 2011-12 to 30%. The investment rate has actually fallen down. Presently, if you see the investment rate is 30%. That investment is contributed by both public sector and private sector. And can you see the share of private sector is actually higher. Out of 30%, private sector contributes 20% and public sector contributes the remaining 10%. That is the thing. Second, like you can see, investment rate has fallen, and it is being said one of the reason why investment rate has fallen in India is because private sector investment has fallen. Private sector investment has reduced from 25% to 20%. That is what you can see there. So the main reason why investment has fallen is because private sector investment has reduced. You need to remember these trends as far as the prelims examination is concerned. Let's focus here. Why should India pursue investment-led model? To make you understand this particular part, there's a particular chart. Let me show you that particular chart. Can you see here? This is the diagram of why should India shift to investment-led model. Think of it. We have higher savings. Because it's a circle, I can start from anywhere. But let's start from here. If people are saving more amount of money, higher savings, people generally save money in the form of bank deposits. People save money in the form of shares, bonds, and so on. If people are saving more money in the form of deposits, shares, bonds, etc., what will happen to investment? Investment will increase. As the investment increases, GDP growth will also increase. Because the GDP increases, production of goods and services increases, job creation in the economy would also increase. So look at this scenario. The GDP is increasing, job creation is increasing, people's income level would increase. Can I say when people income level increases, people will obviously spend money and also save money. Two things are possible. But let's assume that increase in income level is more than what they are spending. For example, every year their income is increasing by 50%, but their expenditure is increasing by 20%, which means on one hand, income is increasing, the expenditure is increasing, but what is more important is savings is increasing much higher. So this becomes a virtuous economic cycle which Economic Survey 2018-19 had spoken about. So why India needs to shift towards investment led model is because it promotes a self sustaining virtuous economic cycle. I hope this part is clear, everyone, right? So coming back here, look at this. Promotes self-sustaining virtuous economic cycle. Increase in investment will lead to increase in productivity, increase in GDP, increase in income level, and hence increase in savings. Next, it will help us realize the vision of Viksit Bharat, because if you look at China, one of the reasons why China has been able to have a phenomenal GDP growth rate is because of higher investment. Investment rate of China was somewhere like 50%, right? So in India also, if you want to become Viksit Bharat, investment rate, which is like 30%, it should increase to 40%. Second reason. Third, we have already discussed that there are a number of problems and challenges with consumption led model, and we need to shift towards investment led model. According to an organization called as CRISIL, CRISIL has published a report called as CRISIL Infrastructure Report 2023. According to this particular report, India needs to spend 143 lakh crores by 2030 on creation of world-class infrastructure. From where we will get this particular money? We will get this money through investment, right? We can help us pursue export-led model, particularly when our net exports, like I said, it is negative, -2. It will enhance productivity. Imagine we can spend more amount of money on education, healthcare, and other social sector. Let me give you an example. On education, we are spending money on creation of PM Shri schools, the model schools. On health, we are spending money on Ayushman Arogya Mandirs, which is also an investment. We are focusing on creation of houses under Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, which is part of your productivity, right? Next, it will promote inclusive growth. I think this is self-explanatory. It will enhance the quality of fiscal deficit. The reason being, government borrows money. After borrowing money, government might spend money on revenue expenditure or capital expenditure. But if you shift towards the investment-led economy, whatever money the government borrows, that money government will spend more on capital expenditure, right? Next, address structural problems in agriculture. Our agriculture sector is facing a number of problems. For example, lack of irrigation facilities, lack of access to APMCs, then poor irrigation facilities, post-harvest losses. All these problems can be solved through investment. That is why it is being said that India needs to pursue investment-led model. Is this part clear? So coming to the next part, that is why private sector investment has fallen. To make you understand why private sector investment has reduced, I would want you to concentrate here. Trends in investment rate. Okay. Please focus here. Can you see this is the year 2004-5 and this is 2007-8. From 2004-5 to 2007-8, can you see the investment rate actually increase from 30% to 35%? Why did it increase? During this phase, India's GDP was growing quite rapidly. And because GDP was growing rapidly, banks in India became very optimistic. They started giving loans to the companies, anticipating that these companies which would take loans they will make more profit and they will be able to repay the loans. They became too optimistic. And the problem was, banks started giving loans even to those companies which are not so credit worthy. So then what happened? In the year 2007-8, there was global financial crisis. Because of this global financial crisis, Indian economy got affected. There was economic slowdown. In particular, India faced a problem which I hope everyone knows, twin balance sheet problem, wherein on one hand, the balance sheet of the banks got dominated by NPAs, whereas the balance sheet of the companies got dominated by higher level of debt. On one hand, banks were unable to give loans because there was more NPA. Companies were unable to make investment because they had taken more loans. Ultimately, both these two problems led to fall in the investment rate. Can you see this? This is problem number one. Problem number two. Let's concentrate here. 2012-13. Can you see sudden drop in investment rate, particularly from 2012-13? What was so special about 2012-13? Let me tell you. From 2008 onwards, when Indian economy was affected by global financial crisis because there was slowdown, RBI started pursuing expansionary monetary policy. We reduced the policy rates and started injecting money into the economy because that was a need of the hour to promote growth. The problem was we ended up pumping too much of money into the economy such that by 2012-13 in India we started facing high rate of inflation. And you know what happens during inflation? RBI then switched from expansionary policy to contractionary policy. Contractionary policy, what will happen to rate of interest? Rate of interest on loans would increase and hence the investment reduced much further. So this is reason number two. Third reason. Just like in India, we were facing inflation in 2012-13, even the US economy was also facing high rate of inflation. In India, RBI was following contractionary monetary policy. In US, the US Fed Bank started following the Fed tapering policy. So in US, as part of Fed tapering policy, US Fed Bank started increasing the rate of interest. And you must understand, rate of interest and yield rates, how are they related to each other? Directly proportional. So because the rate of interest increased, bond yields in US also started increasing. So think I'm a US investor who has invested money in India in 2012-13. Now I'll compare my returns in India with the returns in US. The bond yields in US is increasing. So what I will do, I will take out my money from India and I'll go and start making investment in US. So that led to large scale FPI outflow. You know, this is also referred to as taper tantrums. This taper tantrum we faced recently, 2023. Before 2023, we faced in 2013 as well. So this is the next reason as to why the investment rate in India, can you see suddenly how it dropped to almost like 28%. And then what actually happened? We were hit by COVID somewhere around 2019-20. But it is being said much before the COVID, Indian economy was already facing slowdown. And that particular slowdown in turn led to fall in investment rates. So these are some of the reasons as to why private sector investment in India, which was around 25% in 2010-11, it has now dropped to 20%. So let me show you the bullet points. You can see the bullet points: poor financial position of banks, higher interest rate, external shock because of taper tantrum, underdeveloped capital market because our bond market is not so well developed, economic slowdown which India faced before COVID, and last and most importantly, even the FDI inflows into India has also got reduced in the it has reached to its lowest level in last 16 years. So these are some of the reasons as to why private sector investment has reduced. And this was a article in the Hindu newspaper, which I showed you, which had appeared in April 2024. And then you can look at the initiatives taken by the government to promote investment, most of which are self-explanatory. I hope you should be able to read and understand on your own. There's nothing much to explain in the initiatives. So let me take you to the question, the practice question, where we'll discuss how do you write an answer to the practice question. Okay, please have a look at this question, everyone. India needs to pursue investment-led model to become $7 trillion economy, argue. Discuss the challenges in pursuing investment-led model. So the question has clearly two parts. One, why should India pursue investment-led economy, about which I have already covered. And second, what are the challenges in pursuing investment-led economy? So clearly the body of the answer should have two dimensions. So accordingly, you can see two dimensions. Why should India shift to investment-led economy, and challenges in pursuing investment-led economy. That is done. But what do you think should be the intro here? People attending online, please let me know what should be the intro. Present status in intro, very good. So the best way to start any answer in economy is you can start with the present status and significance. That is the best way to start an intro in economy. And your intro should be loaded with facts. So here, highlight the present status and trends in the investment rate. I have already told you that, right? So that could be your intro. As far as the conclusion is concerned, in the conclusion, because you're writing about the challenges, in the conclusion, you can mention the way forward, the strategies, right? So you can see here, as evident in the growth model of East Asian countries, shift towards investment is a key to Viksit Bharat. This is what we need to do. We need to learn from East Asian countries. But one thing I would want to tell you here, there's something that we need to learn from China. Good things also, bad things also. If China has failed in something, that failure of China should be a learning lesson for us. What is that? See, we keep on highlighting that we must pursue investment-led economy because it will lead to increase in GDP. Absolutely good. But the problem is, over-investment is also a problem. If you make too much of investment, think of it, demand and supply. If you make too much investment, what will happen to supply? Supply will increase a lot. And if supply increases too much, it can create the problem of slowdown. So the same thing has happened in China. Most of you must have heard about the Chinese bubble in real estate market being burst recently, right? So here you can just mention that based upon the recent experience of China, we need to ensure that such a model does not lead to overcapacity, does not lead to debt accumulation and resource misallocation. Clear with this? Okay. But I always keep saying in the mains, you need to enrich your answer, right? You need to convert an average answer into excellent answer. To enrich your answer, please remember a particular key word, BCCDEF. To enrich your answer, quote from the budget, C, committees, case studies, diagrams wherever possible, quote from the economic survey and facts. Budget, case studies, committees, diagrams, economic survey and facts. So how can you enrich this particular answer? D, you can use a diagram highlighting the virtuous cycle. Remember I showed you that particular cycle? You can incorporate that thing. Use facts to highlight recent trends in investment rate. Use case studies to highlight the significance of investment rate like China. In positive way as well as negative way, you can highlight that particular example. So remember this particular framework, BCCDEF. Always make a conscious attempt to incorporate this particular framework to enrich your answers. Okay. Next, the last part of this particular chapter. The last part of this particular chapter is about Viksit Bharat. Here we are going to cover about Viksit Bharat. I hope everyone knows that Prime Minister Modi has come up with a vision of Viksit Bharat by end of 2047. So in this particular discussion, I am going to discuss what problems and challenges India is facing in achieving the vision of Viksit Bharat and what should be done to address these problems and challenges. That is what I am going to cover. So to make your understanding easier, what I have done, I am going to discuss this in the form of a table. Problems and challenges and strategies. Okay. Please read the intro here. If you want to become Viksit Bharat by 2047, India's per capita income, which is right now around 2,300 US dollar, this per capita income should become 21,000 US dollar by 2047. So quite evident, it's a humongous task. It's a very big task for India. RBI has calculated as to what does it take for India to become Viksit Bharat. According to RBI, to become Viksit Bharat, India's real GDP should grow by 7.6% per annum for the next 25 years. It's a very big task for India. 7.6% every year for next 25 years, right? So based upon this, let's understand what are the problems and challenges and how do you address these problems and challenges. Okay. Here, what I want to tell you is, if you want to write an answer to any question which is very broad based, such as a question related to Viksit Bharat, in order to make your answer comprehensive, you should keep this particular framework from the main syllabus in your mind. Look at the framework which I have prepared. If you look at your main syllabus, one aspect of your main syllabus is growth and development. From there, you'll get GDP. In another syllabus, you have inclusive growth That is also there in your syllabus, right? Apart from inclusive growth, you have government budgeting in your syllabus, agriculture in your syllabus, manufacturing in your syllabus, and infrastructure. Within the topic of GDP, you can break down the topic of GDP into different subtopics like savings, consumption, investment, and net exports. You can write 1, 2, 3, 4 points here. So that is what I'm going to discuss. What are the problems and challenges for Viksit Bharat? Let's start with the first point, GDP. सबसे पहले we can pick up the point of savings. What has happened to savings in India? I told you, savings in India has got reduced from 34% to 30%. Remember I told you that virtuous economic cycle? That virtuous economic cycle is possible only when the savings increase. So one of the biggest challenge for the Viksit Bharat is decrease in the savings rate of Indian economy. Savings rate, which is now 30%, it should at least increase to 40%. Students attending online, can you tell me some strategies as to how do you increase the savings rate? How can I increase the savings rate? Quickly. Tax benefit, good. Tax benefit in public provident fund, good. Good, Ashok. Others? How can we encourage people to save more amount of money? Promote small savings schemes, strengthen the bond market, good Vipin. There are multiple ways to increase the savings. For example, don't you think the most fundamental thing that we need to do is improve the financial inclusion, enable people to have access to bank account, enable people to have access to insurance, pension, right? If financial inclusion improves, people will start saving more amount of money. We can give tax exemptions, tax benefits to people to save more amount of money. We can enable people to have access to capital market. Remember, for example, RBI has come up with a retail direct platform where households or individuals like you and me, we can invest in government securities, right? So there are multiple ways to increase the savings. So like I said, savings should increase to at least 40%. So we need to improve financial inclusion, access to capital market, and obviously control inflation, because if inflation takes place, people's savings will erode, right? Second, we have completed the savings. Look at the second point, consumption, right? I have already told you the problems with consumption. So Indian economy is basically a consumption-led model where private final consumption expenditure accounts for 60% of the GDP, which is clearly unsustainable in the long run. And the way forward is we need to shift from consumption-led model to investment-led model. We have already covered that. You already have the points. Look at this. Next point is investment rate. Investment rate in India has got reduced from 34 to 30%. So what should we do to increase the investment rate? You can see, number one, particularly private sector investment has got reduced from 25% to 20%. To encourage more private sector investment, particularly in public-private partnership, PPP models, we need to implement the recommendations of Kelkar committee, details of which I shall be covering in the pillar of infrastructure. Need not worry. We need to develop the bond market. because the bond market in India has remained comparatively underdeveloped. So if companies want money, we need to ensure that the companies have access to capital from the bond market. We need to encourage more FDI. We need to encourage more, set up more development banks. For example, recently, Government of India has set up a development bank called as NABFID, which stands for National Bank for Financing Infrastructure Development. Don't you think if we have a development bank for financing infrastructure, why not a development bank for manufacturing sector, right? So even that can be done. So we need to set up more development banks. Our exports, net exports is negative. So if you look at China, China has pursued a export-led model. Even the smaller economies like Bangladesh, Vietnam, they are focusing on export-led model, which clearly India has failed to capitalize. So we need to start boosting exports to other countries. And how can we do that? Probably we can sign more FTAs, that is free trade agreements. We can get integrated into global value chains, GVCs. We can boost our manufacturing competitiveness, right? So all of these things about what should India do to promote exports, that will be discussed in the external sector. You need not worry about it. Next is, we have covered savings, consumption, investment, net exports, and look at this. Factors of production. It is being said that we are facing a number of problems and challenges with respect to factors of production, that is land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Let's focus on land. Remember, after India's independence, we started implementing land reforms in agriculture. It is being said land reforms in India have not been successful, barring few states. These states include states such as West Bengal, Kerala, etc. In most of the states, land reforms have not been successful. Similarly, land leasing is not allowed in most of the states. And finally, Government of India has come up with a land acquisition law in 2013. It is being said that the new land acquisition law has made it more costly for the private sector to acquire land. According to some studies, the land acquisition has become 30% more costly as compared to what it was before. So that is the biggest problem, land acquisition. Same way, we have a number of problems with respect to labor. The new labor codes have been brought, but there has been delay in notifying these labor codes. Low employability. It is being said that only 51% of graduates in India are employable. It means only half of the graduates who pass out from colleges, they can directly get employed. The remaining half, they do not have the necessary skill set to get jobs. This is something which has to be addressed. How? We'll discuss this in the next class when I take up education and skills. Poor skill set, only 4% of India's workforce has the skill set. Entrepreneurship. We have a number of problems with respect to entrepreneurship, like lack of access to adequate capital, low survival rates. According to a study, only 20% of startups survive beyond 5 years in India. So, in terms of number of startups, India is ranked at 3rd place. There's no dearth of startups in India. But the problem is, we have startups, but most of them fail within the first 5 years. So that is the biggest problem, entrepreneurship. So how do you address these problems? To address these problems, you can see here, finance minister has declared that will bring about factor market reforms. The same has been highlighted in the budget speech, wherein finance minister has highlighted that states would be provided with incentives to implement land reforms. Financial sector vision and strategy document will be brought about in order to improve access to capital. We don't know when will this document come, but finance minister has said that this document will be released. Legislative approval for variable company structure. What is this variable company structure? I shall be covering this under the theme of banking and finance, a separate topic. Do not worry about that. And will simplify rules and regulations for FDI and promote internationalization of rupee. So what you need to do is, if you get a question about Viksit Bharat, you have to keep this particular framework in mind. For this particular framework, write challenges and the strategies, right? It's a very broad based question, right? Then you cannot go into the details of each and every part. You need to have very broad points to write in the mains. Same way, I have highlighted other challenges. All the problems and the challenges with respect to total factor productivity, with respect to income inequality, with respect to tax to GDP ratio, with respect to low income level of the farmers, stagnation in manufacturing sector, higher logistic cost. All of this I have taken it from here and I have incorporated. So when you read this particular chapter, right, medium term outlook, this particular chapter is basically telling the same thing, that India is facing these problems and these problems can be addressed through these strategies. So please remember these points in order to write an answer related to Viksit Bharat. Clear with that? Most of this are self-explanatory. I'm pretty sure you can go through these things. Let's move on to the next chapter. The next chapter is social sector. Okay. In this particular social sector chapter, you can see what all things are included. One is trends in social sector expenditure, the new welfare approach, corporate social responsibility, India's progress in multi-dimensional poverty index, household consumption expenditure, schemes related to health and education, innovation ecosystem, women-led development and rural transformation. What we are going to do now, one by one, we'll start our discussion, starting with the first one, that is trends in the social sector expenditure. Okay. Same like the fact sheet for the GDP, you have this particular fact sheet about the inclusive growth. You can see important facts related to inequality, education, health, gender gap, women-led development. All of this I have incorporated from not just economic survey, but from multiple sources. And these facts will become important for paper 1, paper 2, obviously paper 3, as well as essay. Okay. So let's start with the trends in the social sector expenditure. Look at this particular screenshot. Okay. When I say social services, what is included in the social services? Social services includes education, health, housing, sanitation, drinking water, labor welfare, art and culture, and sports. According to economic survey, all these activities, education, health, housing, sanitation, drinking water, labor welfare, art and culture, sports, all of these activities constitute social services. And this particular chart tells us how much money center and states put together are spending on social services. So based upon that, let's look at the important trends. The first one is, in terms of absolute value, there has been steady increase in the amount of money spent on social services in the last 5 years. You can see here, in the last 5 years, it has steadily increased to reach 23.5 lakh crore. If I want to express expenditure on social services as percentage of GDP, it is 8% of GDP. And in terms of total expenditure, it is 26% of the total expenditure. Expenditure on education is around 3%. To be more precise, 2.7. Expenditure on health is around 1.9%. Please remember these facts. You may get a question with respect to trends in the prelims examination, or you may use these particular facts as fodder points when you're writing an answer in paper 2, because in paper 2 you have a syllabus line, issues related to education and health. Getting it? So remember this particular trend. Let's take up some prelims questions from the topic of social sector to make you understand what kind of questions can be asked. I hope everyone has come across this question, which was asked in prelims 2024. Now this question was pretty easy. This question required you to identify what do you mean by total fertility rate in a particular economy, and the right answer is average number of live births a woman would have by the end of her childbearing age, right? So that is the total fertility rate. On similar lines, let's take up other practice questions related to prelims. Please have a look at the practice question number 9. Let me see how many of you will be able to answer this question. Which among the following statements can be considered as a best argument to promote human development in a country? What do you think is the answer? Yes, anyone? Why should we promote human development? Ashok says D. Omkar says C. Okay. Anyone else? Satish says D. Okay. Others? Sakshi D. Okay. Fine. Let's try to identify the answer to this particular question. The question is a little tricky. In this question, I have framed from NCERT textbook. In NCERT, there is a distinction between two related and confusing concepts. One is the concept of human capital formation, and the other one is the concept of human development. These two concepts are almost same, but with very thin difference. Let's see what is the difference here. When you see human capital says that government should spend money on education, health, and skills of the people. It says you spend money on educating people, making the people healthy, provide them with necessary skill set, because if you provide them with all of these things, it will lead to economic growth and development. GDP would increase, which means human capital treats human beings, that is, people like you and me, as means to achieve some end. What is the end here? End is higher GDP growth rate. So human capital says you invest money on education, health, because this will lead to increase in GDP. What about human development? Human development also says the same thing. Human development says you invest money on education, health, and skill set. But human development says if you educate people, provide the people with healthcare facilities and skills, what will happen is the ability of the people to make their choices will increase. So human development believes that human beings as such, they are an end in itself. So it's like saying you have to invest in education, health and skill because that is what you're supposed to do. Because that will improve the human welfare. Obviously, इसका effect क्या होगा? इसका effect तो GDP होगा, right? I'm not denying that. But human development says you treat human beings as end in itself. Because that is what we should do. We should expand the choices of the people. So fundamentally, human capital and human development, they agree on one thing, that we have to spend on education, health and skill. But human capital says you spend money on these things because it will lead to increase in GDP. Human development says you spend money on these things because that is an end in itself. So if you read the options, can I say the most closest option to human development is actually answer C. Is everyone clear with this? So human development enhances the ability of the people to make their own choices. That is why we must focus on human development. Let's look at this. Can anyone tell me the answer to this question? A particular country has high level of disability adjusted life year. Which among the following best describes such a scenario? So you need to know, what do you mean by disability adjusted life year? Anyone? Okay. Please pay attention now. So what is this disability adjusted life year? Let me just give you an example. Let's say when every one of us is born, we are expected to live until a particular age, ideally. Let's say, for example, it's just an example. Every one of us who is born, we might be expected to live until the age of 80 years. But can I say this is more of a ideal condition? Why is it an ideal condition? The reason being, some people may have premature deaths. Some people may die before the age of 80. That is one reason. Apart from that, there might be people who might live until the age of 80. But the problem is, they might be affected by certain disabilities. They might be affected by certain diseases. Because they are affected by diseases, they might not be able to contribute to the economy. So some people, because of burden of diseases, they might be alive until the age of 80, but they will not be able to contribute. I hope it is clear, right? So we expect that everyone who is born, they will be alive until the age of 80. Everyone will contribute to the growth of the economy until they are 80 years old. But this is more ideal. Some people might die before the age of 80. Some people might be alive until the age of 80, but they might not be able to contribute because of burden of diseases like cancer, diabetes, or for that matter, any other disease, right? So when I say disability adjusted life year, it means how many years are lost in a particular economy because of premature deaths and because of burden of diseases. That is what is DALI. So the right answer in this particular case is D, both A and B. Clear with this, everyone? So please remember this. Premature death and burden of diseases constitute DALI. Look at the next question. Gross enrollment ratio in the primary education is more than 100%. What would this mean? How can gross enrollment ratio be more than 100%? Please see how gross enrollment ratio at any level like primary, secondary or tertiary education is actually calculated. It is calculated as number of students enrolled. Now let's say we are talking about primary education only. So gross enrollment ratio in primary education would be number of students enrolled in primary education irrespective of the age. Number of children enrolled in primary education irrespective of the age divided by number of students in the age group which is supposed to be in primary education. Let's say the primary education is supposed to be like 3 to 11 years, just an example. So how many students are there in the age group 3 to 11? And in the numerator, how many students are actually enrolled irrespective of that age? Now think, it is 80 is to 100. We are 100 students in the age group 3 to 11, but 80 students are enrolled. So gross enrollment ratio would be equal to 80%. If it is 100 upon 100, 100 students are in the age group 3 to 11 and 100 students are enrolled, it means it will be equal to 100%. But look at this situation where you have 120 upon 100. Gross enrollment ratio will become equal to 120%. What does this mean? Concentrate on numerator. Number of students enrolled irrespective of their age is 120. Can I say that some students who are younger than age 3 might have got enrolled? Or some students who are above the age of 11 years might have got enrolled in primary education? Getting it? So that is when the gross enrollment ratio would be more than 100%. So look at the answer now. Question number 11. Why would it be more than 100%? It will be more than 100%. Anyone? Quickly. Yes, you got it right. So more number of children of the higher age group are enrolled in the primary school. This could happen, right? Some children, they might not have availed primary education when they were in the age group 3 to 11. After completing age of 11, they might get enrolled. It is quite possible, right? So that is how you calculate the gross enrollment ratio. Look at the last question here. Consider the following statements related to National Health Policy 2017. The policy seeks to increase the public healthcare expenditure to increase to at least 2.5% of GDP. It is correct. And I told you right now, the healthcare expenditure is 1.9%, right? It should increase to at least 2.5. The policy seeks to eliminate out-of-pocket expenditure. The word is eliminate. You must understand, in a country like ours, it is not possible to eliminate out-of-pocket expenditure. At most, we can reduce the out-of-pocket expenditure. So that is why the statement is incorrect. You must be clever enough to understand that you might not have read about this, but you have to be very smart in interpreting this particular statement and understanding that it is not possible to eliminate the out-of-pocket expenditure. We can at most reduce it, right? Look at the third one. See, healthcare can be categorized into primary, secondary, and tertiary. Where do you think we should spend more amount of money? Primary or tertiary? Don't you think we should spend more amount of money on primary healthcare? Because primary healthcare is more preventive in nature, whereas tertiary healthcare is more curative in nature. So focus should be on prevention rather than, curing people. That is why the third statement, which says that major proportion is given to tertiary care, this is incorrect, because the major proportion is given for primary care. So right answer in this particular case is 1 only. Is everyone clear with this? Okay. Now coming to the new approach to welfare, and let me tell you, this topic, new approach to welfare, I have already covered this in the interim budget discussion. It's already covered. So please go through the interim budget discussion in case if you have not gone through that. And let me tell you, it's a very, very important topic for someone who is preparing for mains. You can get a lot of fodder points from this particular approach while writing an answer related to inclusive growth and development. So I have incorporated this. Please go through the new welfare approach. I have already covered this in the interim budget discussion. I've also incorporated the suggested answer structure in terms of intro, body, conclusion, as well as value addition. Please go to this. Let's move to the next topic. Next topic is CSR, corporate social responsibility. Some of you might have come across this particular question, which was asked in Prelims 2024, that is CSR, corporate social responsibility, right? Anyway, we'll come back to solve this particular question. But what I would want to say is the new welfare approach focuses on collaborative approach between the government and the private sector. The new welfare approach requires that the government and private sector should come together and spend on social services. And can I say one ways by which private sector spends on social services such as education, healthcare, sanitation, housing, it is through CSR, corporate social responsibility. So the economic survey has highlighted the trends in terms of CSR expenditure. Let me show you the trends. I will cover the CSR in the next slide. Do not worry. Look at the trends in CSR expenditure. In particular, see the last 3 years. In last 3 years, can you see the average CSR expenditure is around 25,000 crores. That's the average CSR expenditure. Second, all the companies such as private sector companies as well as public sector companies which fulfill a criteria. What is that criteria? I'll cover in the next slide. All these companies are required to spend for CSR, both private sector and public sector companies. And you can see among the companies which are required to fulfill CSR requirements, PSUs account for just 2% among the companies which are required to fulfill CSR requirement. In spite of that, PSUs spend almost 17% of the total CSR expenditure. Getting this point? So major contribution is by PSUs. Third, they can spend money on different social services, but right now companies are predominantly spending money on education, followed by health. Last, when companies want to spend on CSR, companies can directly spend money, or companies can spend money in partnership with NGOs. Economic survey has pointed out that at least 50% of the CSR funds, at least half of the CSR funds, they are spent by the companies in partnership with NGOs, which is good thing because it is giving a boost to the NGO sector as well, which is a good thing. Getting it? Now, what you should know is some basic prelims pointers about CSR, corporate social responsibility. That is what I'm going to cover now. Okay. Look at the prelims pointers, all of you, on CSR, corporate social responsibility. CSR, corporate social responsibility, has been provided under the Companies Act 2013. So there is a legal framework for CSR. Second, which companies qualify for spending for CSR? All companies, whether it is private sector company or public sector company. You can see private sector companies, foreign companies, PSUs, as well as Section 8 companies. What is Section 8 companies? Section 8 companies means these are the companies which are registered as not for profit. Some companies are registered as not for profit companies. Even such companies are also required to spend for CSR, corporate social responsibility. And look at the second line. It does not matter whether a company is listed or unlisted. Irrespective whether they are listed or unlisted, they are required to spend. But the thing is, not all these companies are required to spend for CSR. There is a qualifying criteria. That qualifying criteria is important from the perspective of your prelims. What is that qualifying criteria? You can see they need to have turnover of 1000 crores or more, or net worth of 500 crores or more, or net profits of 5 crores or more. Can you see the condition which I'm telling you is not an and, the condition is or, which means any company which fulfills at least one of these criteria will have to spend CSR. Net worth, net turnover, 1000 crores, net worth 500 crores, average profit 5 crores. Next, how much money they should spend? Look at this. They have to spend at least 2% of their average net profit of the preceding 3 financial years. In last 3 financial years, what is their average net profit? 2% of that net profit is what they have to spend on corporate social responsibility. To undertake that expenditure, according to the government rules and regulation, all the companies which are required to fulfill CSR obligation, they are required to set up a committee, CSR committee. This committee will recommend the board of directors of the company on what should be the policy of CSR, corporate social responsibility. So the nodal agency within a company for CSR is this particular committee. Monitoring compliance, all those companies which are required to spend on CSR activities, they are required to submit a report to the government, and government will monitor whether the companies have fulfilled their CSR obligations or not. Next, this is something which is important. What happens if the company fails to spend as per the CSR requirements? Until 2021, failure to comply with CSR norms was considered as a criminal offense. But in last 2 to 3 years, we have decriminalized a number of provisions in order to improve the ease of doing business. One of the things which has been decriminalized is non-compliance of CSR. So in 2021, we have said if a company fails to comply with CSR obligations, it is not a criminal offense, rather it is a civil offense. What is civil offense here, by the way? Let's say there is a particular company. This company fails to comply with CSR norms. This company should submit a report to the government explaining the reasons as to why it has failed to spend for CSR. That's the first thing. They are required to submit a report. Second, how much ever money is unspent, that unspent money they have to transfer to a separate fund. Two things they are required to do: submit a report to the government and transfer the unspent money to a separate fund. And if they don't comply with this thing, then government will impose a penalty on them. So that is what it says. The board should specify the reasons and transfer the unspent amount to a separate fund. Failure to do so will attract penalty on the company. So it is not a criminal offense, it is a civil offense. Which activities do not qualify for CSR? This was asked in Prelims 2024. You can see the list of activities. Activities undertaken in pursuance of normal course of business of the company. Activities undertaken outside India. If you are doing something outside India, except for training of Indian sports personnel, all of that will not be considered as CSR. If a company is contributing to political parties, that is not CSR. If a company is spending money benefiting its employees, that cannot be counted as CSR. If a company is sponsoring for the benefit of marketing, even that is not considered as CSR. And last and most important, if companies spend money on CSR, they cannot claim tax exemptions. They don't get any tax benefits on spending on CSR. So these are some of the prelims pointers on corporate social responsibility that you need to be aware of. Based upon that, let's go back and take up that particular question which was asked in prelims 2024. Look at this question, prelims 2024. With reference to corporate social responsibility rules in India, consider the following statements. CSR rules specify that expenditure that benefit the company directly or its employees will not be considered as CSR activities. Yes, indeed. I told you, if company is spending money that is benefiting the company directly or its employees, it will not be considered as CSR. CSR rules do not specify minimum spending. It is incorrect because it says at least 2% of your average net profit in last 3 years should be spent as CSR. So right answer, 1 only. Quickly have a look at this practice question. With reference to corporate social responsibility, consider the following statements. What do you think is the answer? Yes, good Satish. CSR has been provided under the Companies Act. It is correct. CSR is applicable only to the listed companies in India? No, it is applicable to listed and unlisted. Non-compliance is a criminal offense. It was a criminal offense until 2021. Later, now it has become a civil offense. Companies can claim tax exemptions? Absolutely not. So, right answer is only one. So, this is about CSR, corporate social responsibility. Okay. Next is India's progress in MPI, multi-dimensional poverty index. This is there in the economic survey of this year. You all know that there is an index called as Global Multi-Dimensional Poverty Index. This Global Multi-Dimensional Poverty Index is published by UNDP in association with Oxford Institute, right? Similar to the global MPI, which is published at a global level, in India, there is National MPI, Multidimensional Poverty Index. This National Multidimensional Poverty Index is published by Niti Aayog. Niti Aayog has recently highlighted India's achievements with respect to multidimensional poverty index. And the same thing has been incorporated in this year's economic survey. So, as far as your prelims examination is concerned, you might get questions related to basics of multidimensional poverty index. Questions could be of like this: details about multidimensional poverty index, or question on results of the latest multidimensional poverty index. This is as far as the prelims examination is concerned. As far as the mains examination is concerned, you could get this type of question as to why multidimensional poverty index is a better indicator to measure poverty in India. Why is it a good indicator to measure poverty? So in next 10 minutes, I'm going to cover all of these details related to MPI, Multidimensional Poverty Index. So let's start our discussion with the basics. Look at this. Like I said, National Multidimensional Poverty Index is measured by Niti Aayog. To measure the Multidimensional Poverty Index, Niti Aayog has chosen 3 dimensions: education, health, and standard of living. These 3 dimensions are in turn broken down into 12 deprivations. One fundamental difference here is when you see global MPI will also use the 3 dimensions: education, health, and standard of living, but it uses 10 indicators. Whereas National MPI, which is published by Niti Aayog, it uses 12 indicators to measure deprivation. To each of these 12 indicators, Niti Aayog, can you see it has assigned a weightage, right? Now, what Niti Aayog does, under this National Multidimensional Poverty Index, it measures the incidence of multidimensional poverty. That means how many people are actually multidimensionally poor. And the criteria to classify a particular household or an individual as multidimensionally poor is in at least one third of these indicators, they should face deprivation. If a household or an individual is facing deprivation in at least one third of these indicators, then we can call such a person as multidimensionally poor. That is what is incidence. Apart from measuring incidence, national MPI also measures the intensity of poverty. What is intensity of poverty? Let me just touch upon this particular idea of intensity. Let's consider a first scenario where people are required to spend 200 rupees, just as an example, every month to meet their basic expenses. 200 rupees. And let's say you have two people who are spending 190 rupees every month to meet their basic expenses. So if you look at incidence of poverty, which tells us how many people are poor, the incidence of poverty will tell us that two people are poor because they are spending below 200 rupees. This is the first scenario. Let's look at second scenario. Same, people are required to spend 200 rupees per month to meet their basic needs. There are two people, both of whom are spending just 50 rupees every month. If you measure incidence of poverty, how many people are poor in the first case? 2. In second case, how many people are poor? Still 2. But between these two, which is worse? Can I say second is much worse? Because people in the second scenario are more poorer as compared to the first scenario. So we need to measure intensity of poverty, which is actually done by National Multidimensional Poverty Index. Both the two things are measured. So having discussed as to what is MPI, how is it measured, let's get into the trends in terms of MPI and why is it a good indicator. Okay, please pay attention, all of you. I've already covered the details of MPI. You can see all of these details. Look at the present status. Niti Aayog has highlighted that in last one decade, that is from 2013 to 2023, we have been able to pull out a whopping 25 crore Indians out of multi-dimensional poverty, which is actually a great achievement. That's the first major thing. Second, the proportion of people who are multidimensionally poor, it has got reduced from 29% to 11%. And can you see, among the states, it is Uttar Pradesh followed by Bihar, where we have seen the fastest and largest reduction in the number of people who are multidimensionally poor, which is once again a good thing because we are able to reduce poverty in the states where it actually matters. And lastly, SDG target 1.2 seeks to reduce multidimensional poverty by at least half. And Economic Survey has pointed out that we would be able to meet this target much ahead of 2030. So these are our trends with respect to MPI. Please remember this. Okay, now coming to why is multi-dimensional poverty index good indicator for measuring poverty? This has been highlighted by Economic Survey as well as Niti Aayog. Let's understand why is it a good indicator. To understand this, please focus on that poverty trap, how people have fallen into poverty trap. People are poor. Because people are poor, their income is less. Their income is less means they'll not be able to spend on their basic needs, because of which they have multiple deprivations in terms of education, health. It leads to poor capital formation. Poor capital formation means lower GDP and hence poverty. So they are caught in that vicious cycle of poverty trap. So, keeping this thing in mind, I'm going to make you understand why MPI is a good indicator to measure poverty. Please focus on this poverty trap. If I want to find out how many people are actually poor in a particular country, what we can do is we can know or we can measure the income of the people, right? That is one way to measure poverty. Second way to measure poverty is we can know how much money people are spending on basic needs. That is the second way. And third way is we can measure deprivations faced by the people. So what I'm trying to tell you here is if you measure poverty at this level, it is much better as compared to measuring poverty at first level or second level. Why? Let's start with this. Why measuring poverty at income level is not good? Let's focus on this. We can see the first reason. First reason is income is a necessary condition for poverty eradication. But can I say that it is not the only condition? Because apart from income, to eradicate poverty, people need to have access to education. People need to have access to healthcare facilities. People need to have jobs. So multiple factors are needed to eradicate poverty. Income is the most important factor, but it is not the only factor. That's the first thing. Second, people earn money. After earning money, people might spend money on education, healthcare, sanitation, and so on. And people might also spend money on temptation goods. When you measure poverty but taking into account only income, the problem here is you are not accounting for the expenditure of the people. Where are the people spending? It might be so happening that people are earning good amount of money, but they're not spending on education or health, rather they're spending on, let's say, temptation goods. Temptation goods such as alcohol, tobacco, gambling, etc. Right? And third and most important, in a country such as India, which is dominated by informal economy, it is quite difficult for us to calculate the income of the people. We do not have income estimates. That is why we don't measure poverty at income level. Coming to second point. What if we measure poverty by taking into account expenditure? In fact, India has been doing it. For example, most of you must be knowing about the BPL estimates, below poverty line estimates. The BPL estimates are actually based upon monthly per capita consumption expenditure, MPCE, where we categorize people as living below poverty line based upon the money which they are spending. But once again, it is being said it is not a good approach to measure poverty. Why? Let's understand. Number one, people might be spending money on education, health, and skills, but they might be borrowing money to spend for that, right? So, if you take into account only expenditure, we might be discounting the fact that the households have borrowed money. And if they borrow more amount of money, there's always a possibility that the households might fall into debt trap. So that's a problem. Second, household welfare will not just depend upon how much money the households are spending, because the government, especially in a country like India, also spends a lot of money on education, healthcare, and so on. So you can see household welfare depends not only on household expenditure, but it also depends upon the government expenditure also. So that is why it is not good to measure poverty by taking into account income. as well as expenditure. Last and most important is there are number of advantages of MPI. You can look at the advantages. It measures the poverty in terms of multiple deprivations, like it takes into account 12 indicators. It is measuring poverty not in terms of inputs, that is income or expenditure. It is measuring poverty in terms of outcomes, that is deprivations, which is much better way. It takes into account both incidence of poverty as well as intensity of poverty. And lastly, it is based upon the internationally accepted methodology which is followed by UNDP for publishing the global multidimensional poverty index. So because of these reasons, we say that MPI is a good indicator for measuring poverty. I hope this part is clear, right? Let's take up the questions. Look at this question. Discuss why MPI is a better indicator to measure poverty in India. Discuss India's progress in eradicating MPI. As you can see, there are two parts to this question. One is why MPI is good, and second part is what are India's progress. So clearly in the body of the answer, there will be two dimensions. Why MPI is a better indicator to measure poverty, and highlight India's progress in eradicating multidimensional poverty. But don't you think to write why MPI is a better indicator, you need to write some features of MPI. There is no need for you to explain MPI, but just 2 to 3 features you should write, so that it becomes easier for you to substantiate the next part of the answer. So this becomes the body of the answer. As far as intro is concerned, in the intro you can just mention basic details about MPI, that is who is publishing MPI and what is its significance. For example, you can look at the intro here. The Multidimensional Poverty Index is published by Niti Aayog based upon internationally accepted methodology followed for the publication of global MPI. The MPI is influenced by Amartya Sen's capability approach to poverty eradication. According to Amartya Sen, income is not the only condition needed for eradication of poverty. For eradication of poverty, we need to ensure that people are capable. How are people capable? When they have access to education, health, sanitation, skills, right? So can I say MPI is to large extent derived from this particular philosophy of Amartya Sen. And as far as the conclusion is concerned, we can see the conclusion. Going forward, as highlighted by Economic Survey 23-24, government needs to keep focusing on new welfare approach. Remember, we covered that in the interim budget. Government needs to keep focusing on new welfare approach to capitalize on the positive outcomes and move towards attainment of SDGs by 2030. That is a fair conclusion which you can write. Let's take up the prelims. Okay, answer enrichment. Like I said, B, double C, D, E, F. As far as D is concerned, you can use diagram to highlight the vicious cycle of poverty trap. You can use it between the intro and the body. Use facts and figures to highlight India's progress in MPI. And lastly, quote economic survey to highlight the new welfare approach. That is how you can add value to your answer. Okay. Please have a look at the practice MCQ number 14, all of you. With respect to National Multidimensional Poverty Index, consider the following statements. National MPI measures both incidence and intensity of poverty. Yes. National MPI uses 10 indicators which is similar to global NPI? Absolutely not. Global NPI uses 10 indicators, national NPI uses 12 indicators. So second statement is incorrect. A household is declared to be multidimensionally poor if it faces deprivations in at least 1/3 of the weighted indicators. It is right. So a right answer is 1 and 3 only. With respect to results of the latest multidimensional poverty index, consider the following statements. The incidence of multidimensional poverty has reduced to below 10% for the first time. No. It has got reduced from 29% in 2013 to 11% in 2023. It is still above 10%. UP has registered the largest decline in the number of poor, followed by Bihar. Correct. India is unlikely to achieve SDG target. Like I said, India is going to achieve this SDG target 1.2 much ahead of the target of 2030. So this is incorrect. So right answer is 2 only. Is that clear? Okay. Okay. The next topic is about Household Consumption Expenditure Survey 2023, which have been incorporated in the economic survey. All the details about Household Consumption Expenditure Survey I have incorporated in the form of a table. It is mostly factual. Please go through this monthly per capita consumption expenditure. Quite important from the perspective of prelims. I hope you should be able to go through this. The next topic is about healthcare schemes and programs. Why is it important? Is because in prelims 2022 you had this question about Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission. This was a question asked in prelims 2022. So the economic survey this year in the chapter of social sector, it has highlighted some important schemes related to health. You need to know these schemes and then we'll take up some practice questions from these schemes. Okay. So let's see which all schemes the economic survey has made a mention. The first scheme which economic survey has made mention is Pradhan Mantri Jan Aushadhi Kendras. I hope everyone knows about Pradhan Mantri Jan Aushadhi Kendras, right? The basic mandate of Jan Aushadhi Kendras is to provide for cheap and affordable generic medicines through Pradhan Mantri Jan Aushadhi Kendras. Why is it important? If you go a decade back, almost 10 years back, the out-of-pocket expenditure on health was as high as 65%. It means if 100 rupees is spent on health, 65 rupees is spent by the people from their own pocket. Majority of which is actually on medicines, especially the branded medicines. So to reduce the out-of-pocket expenditure on health, government came up with the scheme of Jan Aushadhi Kendras. Under this, we are providing for generic medicines. And if you are wondering, what are generic medicines? Generic medicines are basically the medicines which are sold under the chemical composition name rather than a brand name. For example, if you are having fever, you might take Dolo 650 or Crocin. Dolo 650 or Crocin is a branded drug. If you see the chemical composition of Crocin, Crocin actually includes paracetamol. You can actually buy a drug called as paracetamol. That paracetamol itself is a generic medicine. Other examples, amoxicillin or metformin. Metformin is generally taken by people who are diabetic. All of these are generic medicines. So you can see who can open Jan Aushadhi Kendras? Individuals, hospitals, charitable organizations, NGOs, as well as government agencies. What are the incentives available? if you open Jan Aushadhi Kendras, first incentive is you get a 20% margin on MRP. For example, let's say I am operating a Jan Aushadhi Kendra. I might get a medicine at rupees 80 and I will sell it at MRP of rupees 100. For me, what's the benefit? 20 rupees, right? So this is a margin which I would get. So that's the first benefit. Second benefit is, if you apply for opening Jan Aushadhi Kendras and if you get that approval, government will give you one-time grant of up to rupees 5 lakhs. Why? To set up Jan Aushadhi Kendras, there's a lot of capital expenditure which is to be incurred. You need to buy furniture, you might have to buy computer, right? So to ensure that you're able to meet the capital expenditure, government gives you one-time grant of 5 lakh. Please understand the nodal department. It is not the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. It is Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizer. Within this ministry, you have Department of Pharmaceuticals. Implementation agency is Pharmaceuticals and Medical Devices Bureau of India. That is Pradhan Mantri Jan Aushadhi Kendras. This is one scheme. Another scheme, Ayushman Bharat. I'm very sure most of you must have read about Ayushman Bharat. So Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana. I have incorporated all the details about this particular scheme, mostly factual. Please go through this particular scheme. Jan Arogya Yojana. Amrit. Affordable medicines and reliable implants for treatment. Under Pradhan Mantri Jan Aushadhi Kendras, we are providing for generic medicines. Under Amrit Pharmacy, we are selling drugs for cancer and heart diseases at highly discounted prices of almost 60% of MRP. So it is almost similar to Jan Aushadhi Kendras, except the fact that Jan Aushadhi Kendras focus on selling generic drugs, whereas Amrit focus on selling medicines for cancer and heart diseases. And it comes under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. I have incorporated the same in the PPT. Please go through this. And then there is Ayushman Bhav campaign, which is basically a campaign to inform citizens about government's flagship schemes. It's basically a campaign. As such, they know specific healthcare expenditure which is incurred under this particular scheme. Then there is Ayushman Bharat Digital Health Mission. What is this Ayushman Bharat Digital Health Mission? Can I say the government is focusing a lot on digital initiatives to empower the people and to improve the governance? Just ask for. Just give me 2 minutes. Am I audible now? Yes, Sakshi, am I audible now? Okay, fine. So finally, what is this Ayushman Bharat Digital Health Mission? So I was saying that the government has focused a lot on digital initiatives in order to empower the people and to improve the good governance. For example, government has come up with initiatives such as UPI, then ONDC, Open Network for Digital Commerce, then JAM Trinity, Jandan Aadhaar Mobile, right? Similar to that, now government has come up with digital initiative in the health sector called as Ayushman Bharat Digital Health Mission. This mission, as you can see, has three components. Component number one is digital health ID to the Indian citizens. People like you and me, we get a Aadhaar card. Similar to Aadhaar card, now government is planning to issue digital health ID, which is a 14-digit unique ID. What we are going to do under this ID is, once the ID is created, all our health details will be included or covered under this health ID. For example, let's say I go and get a lab test done, a diagnostic test done. The lab reports will be incorporated into the database. Similarly, if I go to a doctor prescribe me some medicines, all those medicines which have been prescribed by doctor will be included in my health ID. If I get a surgery done, those details will also be included. So it's like one stop solution where you can get all the health records of a particular person under one single ID. What is the benefit? Think if you go to a doctor, the doctor can simply type in your healthcare ID, and by looking at your healthcare ID, he gets an entire data about your history of health records. The treatment will be more efficient that way. I hope you're getting this. So that is digital health ID. Healthcare professionals registry. It is being said that in India, there's a lot of information asymmetry between patients and doctors. What kind of information asymmetry? This is what the government has said. There are a lot of doctors who are practicing in India, and some of these doctors who are practicing, they might not be having the medical degree. So there are a lot of fake doctors as well. Imagine you end up getting treated by a fake doctor, right? That is a much bigger problem. So how do you solve this problem? For that, government, to reduce this information asymmetry, government has decided to create a healthcare professional registry, a database of all the medical professionals who are practicing both traditional medicine, that is Ayush, as well as modern medicines. How is it beneficial? I want to visit a doctor. To visit a doctor, if I know his health ID, I can enter his health ID, I can get to know what is his qualification, what has been his years of experience. So I, as a patient, I can make more informed choice with respect to which particular doctor I would want to go, right? So that is healthcare professional registry. Just like how we are creating a digital ID for patients, an ID for healthcare professionals, we are also creating a ID for all the hospitals, diagnostic labs, test centers, and so on. So all the hospitals, clinics, diagnostic lab, pharmacies, for all of that, we are creating database. That is Ayushman Bharat Digital Health Mission, which is implemented by National Health Authority. This is the same authority which is actually implementing the Ayushman Bharat Jan Arogya Yojana, the health insurance scheme. So please remember. So going back to the question which was asked, please look at the question asked in Prelims 2022. This question was a little controversial in terms of statements. Let's read the statement. With reference to Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission, consider the following statements. Private and public hospitals must adopt it. Is it mandatory for everyone? As such, government has not clearly highlighted that it is mandatory. But it is expected that because they will get benefited, they will get enrolled under this. So because the word must is used, the statement is incorrect. as it aims to achieve universal health coverage, every citizen of India, the word is should be part of it ultimately. Now, sometimes UPSC plays with the words must, should, and so on. Can you see here? Enrollment under Ayushman Bharat Digital Health Mission for people like you and me, it is not mandatory. It is voluntary. It is up to us whether we want to enroll or not. But the word which is used here is should. That is why this statement is incorrect. It has seamless portability across the country, yes, because it's a digital database, it has seamless portability, right? If I move from one state to another, my health records will also get shifted in a way. So the third statement is correct. So right answer is 3 only. Let's look at practice question number 19. With respect to Ayushman Bharat Jan Arogya Yojana, consider the following statements. PMJ provides health insurance cover of rupees 5 lakh per family per year for secondary and tertiary care hospitalization, which is correct. That is what is Ayushman Bharat. All pre-existing conditions are covered from day one. What is this pre-existing conditions? Let me just tell you here. If you enroll under a private health insurance, you know what they will say is pre-existing conditions will not be covered. If someone is already suffering from some diseases like diabetes, cardiac problem, or say liver problem, it won't be covered from day one. So all the private health insurance companies have a waiting period. Like they will say you take a health insurance and after 1 or 2 years if you have any healthcare problems, then we will provide for the healthcare facilities. Why do we provide for that healthcare the waiting period? Imagine a particular person is having a heart problem today. Now this person immediately upon having heart problem, he can take a health insurance and he can get the treatment. The cost will be borne by private health insurance companies, right? So to avoid that from happening, all the private insurance companies provide for a waiting period. But the best part about Ayushman Bharat is all the pre-existing conditions. If someone is already having a problem, that problem will be treated right from day one, which is very good. There is no cap on the family size or age of beneficiaries. Yes, a family could have 5 members or 10 members. All those members would be covered. But the cap is in terms of amount. How much is the amount? 5 lakhs, right? So this is correct. So the right answer is 1, 2, and 3. Practice MCQ number 20. With reference to Pradhan Mantri Jan Aushadhi Kendras, consider the following statements. Jan Aushadhi Kendras can be opened only by individuals and NGOs? No. Like I said, it can be opened by hospitals, government agencies, charitable institutions, right? That is why it is incorrect. Ministry of Health and Family Welfare is a nodal ministry. I told you it is not Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. It is Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers. So this is incorrect. So right answer is neither 1 nor 2. So this is about healthcare related schemes. Now there are something else. For example, research and development, R&D. With respect to R&D, I have incorporated this into the PPT along with the practice question. So I have highlighted what is India's expenditure on research and development, as you can see. And then there is a mind map on research and development ecosystem of India, which is basically what is the present status, why should India focus on innovation, what are India's achievements in terms of innovation, challenges in R&D ecosystem, what initiatives has the government taken, and what recommendations. This is the recommendations of the economic survey. All of this is about R&D ecosystem. Same way, you have women-led development. that is the last part of this particular chapter, women-led development. With respect to women-led development, I have highlighted what is the present status of women-led development, what are the initiatives taken by the government for women-led development in terms of economy, health, and education, and what are India's achievement, and what more should be done in order to empower the women. And here I have incorporated ILO's 5R framework. So I request everyone, please go through this particular content on women-led development. Is that clear, everyone? So finally, we are done with the chapter of social sector. And like I said, the chapter of social sector was little lengthy because it deals with inclusive growth and development, which itself is a big topic. So what we will do is, in the next session, we will be covering the theme of external sector, and there is one more chapter, the chapter of employment and skills, that also will be covered in the next video. So we will inform you when it will be done. Hopefully, once again tomorrow, same time, 6 to 8, we'll have the session wherein we shall be covering the next theme, that is probably the external sector. The details will be informed to you. Do not worry. Okay? I hope it is clear, everyone. The PPT will be shared with you. Please go to the PPT and start revising from the PPT. Yes. Okay, fine. Thank you so much. So we'll soon meet for the next session. Thank you so much.